Good morning. Oh, that is so... I'll leave it back here. Can you hear me okay? Okay, great. Good morning. Yes, so I'm Toni Dunne, and it is my pleasure to be with you this morning. I've been in the industry for 30 years and seen a lot of changes over these past 30 years. Some of them very exciting, and some of them, challenges. And so that's what we're here to talk about this morning is cybersecurity challenges and the opportunities that we have in the NG 911 world. I have an esteemed panel for your pleasure this morning. And what we're going to do is just basically have a conversation. So we've got some questions queued up to start that conversation. And so to start with, I'd like to introduce to you the panel. To my immediate right is Rob Leonard. He is the security manager at Hamilton Telecommunications, where he specializes in cybersecurity, active director management, implementation of enterprise software solutions, and end-user support. With over 20 years of IT experience, Rob has worked with government agencies to help guide efforts to reach a uniform and all-encompassing cybersecurity standard. He has served on various industry-related committees and been a guest speaker at the NG 911 Institute cybersecurity panel held in Washington, D.C. So thank you, Rob, for being here. To his right, we have Jay English, who many of you may already know being an APCO member, right? 30 years of experience in the public safety world, including 20 years as a law enforcement officer, manager, director of 3 different PSAPs, DHS Public Safety Program Manager, and currently serves as the Chief Technology Officer for APCO International. He has conducted numerous presentations around the nation and in Canada, Europe, and Mexico related to emergency communications, public safety technology, 911, and cybersecurity. He is an experienced presenter and has facilitated over 20 years of experience in this area. And then to his right, we have Mark Perkins. Mark is an experienced professional as well. His background includes oversight to call centers, operations, network operations centers, security operations centers, repair services, field service, and managed services. He has significant experience in public safety and telco and enterprise markets. Mark has had a successful career in leading international operations across all continents and is very adept at managing both internal and outsourced models to achieve our peak organizational performance that we so desire. So thank you, gentlemen, for being with us this morning. We will definitely would like to hear from you and what your questions are as well. So just raise your hand and we will, do you want them to wait or interject? What is your desires?
I would hope that this would be very open and conversational, okay. So please don't be overly polite.
Okay. Just raise your hand, and this gentleman here will make sure that you have the mic. The session is being recorded, and for those who were not able to attend but have purchased the session to listen to later, we'd like to make sure that they hear your questions as well. So my first question that I'm going to throw on the table is, gentlemen, what are the most significant challenges that public safety agencies are experiencing regarding cybersecurity today?
I think it's managing the rapid changes. I think just when we think we have a plan, things change again. I think we're going to talk about some emerging trends in public safety, cybersecurity, but I think just staying in front of the issue is extremely challenging. We've seen a rapid migration to advancement in ransomware attacks. The actors are very innovative, they're very sophisticated, they're very intelligent. They understand protection systems and defense systems. And with the convergence of Bitcoin and anonymous payment, it's become a lucrative exercise for them. So I think the challenge is, what do we do? What do we do in terms of prevention? What do we do in terms of continuity planning? I think that's the biggest challenge.
Yeah, I'd agree with that too. One of the biggest things that we're running up against is having a set standard. nobody likes red tape, nobody likes something that slows efficiencies down, but in this particular case, the ability to have a set standard, and whether that's set by a certain state, like you see California with their CCPA standards coming out now, from a privacy standpoint, you want to have something that you can measure success by. And like Mark alluded to, when that changes, the expectations also change, and the bar gets constantly moved, and to be able to hit that mark is constantly moving left, right, up, and down. And so if we can have somebody or some entity come in and make a certain standard that we all know it's going to change, but not change from the roots of what we're trying to accomplish, I think we'll be considerably more successful. You have many states adopting their own cybersecurity standards, and for people like myself and Mark, trying to learn 50 different standards and trying to meet the mark for every one of those states is becoming increasingly difficult. So I think that's probably the best opportunity we have is to really kind of push and work on some committees that maybe are at the federal level that can get an all-encompassing standard.
So that was a tactical move on my part, what they said. The only thing I'll add, and I agree with everything both Rob and Mark said, I also think training and awareness and information sharing kind of as a package are a big deal right now. When you have an emergency communications center that gets hit by an attack, and the communications center immediately north of them with boundaries and mutual aid agreements gets hit by the same attack 4 hours later, and it takes them 4 weeks to find out they were both hit by the same attack on the same day, we're not sharing information. On top of that, I think what we've also seen is that the telecommunicator, the line telecommunicator, sees the early indicators of the attack first, and they are the least trained in how to recognize any kind of cyber incident. So making our folks not only aware that there is a threat, because anybody who owns a computer or a cell phone or a smartphone knows that there's a cybersecurity problem, but they don't know what to look for. So you're in a highly complex communications world with data, voice, video, audio, you name it, connectivity, and folks don't know how to recognize the beginnings of a cyber attack. So training is really important. Awareness and sharing that information one agency to the next. Don't be afraid to cross the line of the fiefdom from your city or your county to the next city or county and share information. And as Rob said, standards that guide how we train and how we share and how we defend our networks are very important to getting us there.
I just wanted to add one other thing, and I absolutely agree with that as well. I think the other challenge we're facing is that the burden of what we do is falling more and more on agency leadership, IT leadership. We've been fortunate enough to have some sessions with DHS, the FBI, and what is very clear is that the amount of cases, the amount of requests that flow into those agencies, they're managing that caseload with hundreds of agents, and the caseload is in the hundreds of thousands. So the federal government, I agree with standards, I agree with guidance, potentially funding, but investigation and enforcing and catching these people is not going to help us. So it is the burden on what to do is on agency leadership. We can no longer look to law enforcement to prevent this. So we're the ones that have the burden to act.
So for the individuals that may not be in this room, and I'm going to toss a question out to you that's not something that we've discussed before.
That's cheating.
But I know that there will be trainers that are listening to this audio later. There will be managers and IT people as well. And so the question would be: you mentioned, what do they look for? How do they know that something's kind of hinky that would maybe be a trigger to recognizing that it would be a possible threat or breach?
I'll kick off with that. That's a tough question because that's 8 hours worth of training to show them how to do that at a minimum. But basic cyber hygiene courses are out there and there are basic cyber hygiene courses that are free that'll take an hour or two that are better than nothing, that aren't specific to public safety. But there are the early indicators for TDOS, a telephony denial of service, for example, is a sudden unexplained spike in phone calls. And it could be against your admin lines. In fact, it probably will be. Rarely we see it hit 911 trunks. On a DDoS attack, it's just you log onto a machine and it starts acting, highly technical term, wonky, and all of a sudden it just stops working. We're used to that, I think, in the days of technology, the infamous blue screen of death that everybody gets every now and then. And a cyber attack, unfortunately, can look like that early on, but in very quick succession, especially ransomware, proceeds from 1 machine to 10 machines to 100 machines to your entire network. I guess the short answer is, if you see, and this is the old DHS, if you see something, say something. If something looks wrong with your CAD system, with your 911 system, with your phones in general, if something just looks wrong, it's better to report it, let your supervisor know. Supervisor can let the manager and the IT folks know. There are a lot of indicators. Phishing attacks are all over the place, so everybody has email. A phishing attack, especially now, looks more and more like legitimate email. The big thing that we're seeing right now on injecting ransomware is that a Trojan gets into the network first, and the Trojan has a shell around it that has the ransomware encapsulated in it. Well, the Trojan gets in from a phishing attack, and the phishing attack starts from email, and it's clicking one link. And if you have 100 people, it takes 1. If you have 1,000 people, it takes 1. If you have 10,000 people, it still only takes 1. So training folks on what to look for in their email, what to look for on their machines, what to look for on the phone systems, that's really what the basic cyber hygiene's about. And they're just, I think we were talking about it earlier, I'll let Mark and Rob expound on it, but there are so many different types of attacks out there, and as was mentioned by Mark, they change so quickly. Right about the time we have a solution, the bad guys have 10 new vectors. RYUK virus, which is a ransomware that's hitting public safety agencies all over the country right now, has used 3 different Trojans to inject the ransomware. And as soon as we figure out what the Trojan is, they just switch to a different one. And your antivirus system doesn't see the signature and it lets it in, and they'll get away with it for another couple hundred cases. They'll get caught and then they'll move to another one. And I think you were talking about how quickly that changes.
For sure. I think the big thing with respect to training and cyber awareness and how do we train frontline telecommunicators on what to see. In the clients that we work with, it's almost binary. We have clients that are training everybody in the organization on cyber awareness and fostering a cyber aware culture at the workforce. And then we have other clients where just due to bandwidth or just a lack of prioritization, they're not. So I would encourage you to do something. Vet a cyber awareness training class for all of your employees, and make it a part of a quarterly training plan, a semi-annual training plan. Reinforce it, make sure it's part of your onboarding training plan. And it doesn't have to be significant, but there's tremendous benefit in doing something, and there's tremendous risk in doing nothing.
Yeah, just a caveat on that. There is no better place to spend money than training of your people. They're the number one risk. They'll always be the number one risk. And actually taking an outside of the box perspective on how to do that is the biggest benefit that a PSAP or anybody that has a network has at their disposal. We've implemented a pretty robust training program, and we've seen the benefits and the fruits of that immediately. You see a buy-in from all of your employees. You see a team effort from a security standpoint, because at that point they understand that an attack on the network is basically an attack on everybody who works on that network's livelihood. So if you take away anything today, it's look for somebody who will come in, give you at least guidance on how to do the training, if not doing the training for you, and you'll see the benefits of that money right away.
Thank you. So are there specific trends that you're seeing at the national level in public safety, cybersecurity? Sorry.
Ransomware.
Ransomware
Is rampant. It's it's one of those things where, and we were talking before the panel a few years ago, the virus was, you had Conficker and you had, a couple of these other viruses out there that would devastate networks. And viruses, when was the last time you heard of a virus attack that, crippled a city or crippled a, municipality? Everything you hear is ransomware, or it's a data breach. Very, very rarely do you see the headline be the Conficker virus, or the virus did this, or the virus did that. What people are doing now is they're gaining access to networks and they're data mining, right? They're taking all the personal information of people from Equifax or some of these other half dozen breaches we've heard about in the last couple months. So as we see viruses kind of downscale and the uptick of ransomware and data breaches increase, we're finding that no longer is the goal to destroy. The goal is to be monetarily compensated for these, like Jay said, very smart people's work. They no longer want to destroy data. They want to mine it and sell it on the dark web. They want to post that they were able to hack a particular very secure network and post that on Reddit. There's people that want accolades for busting through a DOJ or another department, government agency's network. And so not only are we seeing a morph of going from destroy to monetary, but we're also seeing people doing things so that they can hold people captive. And that's where the ransomware comes in. Bitcoin, as Mark alluded to, has made it very easy to get paid without being tracked. And quite frankly, until that changes, which I don't see happening very soon, it's going to continue to be a threat to networks.
I think the trends that we're seeing, certainly ransomware is the predominant attack. A couple of other things that we see. One is just, and this is obvious to everyone in the room, is the increase in quantity and severity of the attacks. And because of that, there's a renewed focus, again, referencing DHS and the FBI, and it's unfortunate because it's an increased burden on the agency leadership, is that it's not if, it's when. It's not if you're going to be attacked, it's when are you going to be attacked. So now not only do you have to worry and be concerned, and I'll reference my previous point, law enforcement is not catching these individuals. So this is going to continue to grow, continue to get worse, and the burden to act and prevent is upon us. But now not only is that burden to protect on us, but there's an increased focus in continuity planning. Do you have robust and appropriate backups? Are you in a position to restore quickly? Are you in a position to restore quickly given a ransomware attack on literally any core component of any core functional database? Because it's now not only just the CAD application. So not only burden to protect, burden on continuity planning. The other little bit of good news here is there are emerging solutions, and it's very unfortunate, but the reality is also that given this need in the market space, there are emerging solutions in this space. We see, I was talking to the gentleman from Washington earlier, there are emerging and affordable solutions for cybersecurity monitoring of your infrastructure. 2 years ago or 3 years ago in the public safety space, you know, a 5-position agency or a 20-position agency wasn't going to spend $250,000 a year for cybersecurity monitoring. That just wasn't tenable. But there are solutions today for ongoing monitoring of your infrastructure that are emerging because of this problem. There are training vendors that are emerging because of this problem. There are firms that will conduct an independent third-party cybersecurity assessment of your infrastructure in a very affordable, manageable manner. So I would, you know, there are the quantity and severity is growing. The burden is continually increased on the agency professionals, but the little bit of silver lining is that there are solutions and there are partners that are marketing very viable, very valuable solutions at an affordable rate. And I would encourage you to vet and seek, you know, and explore those possibilities.
I'll piggyback off what Mark said just a little bit with regard to the emerging and affordable solutions. That certainly is the case, and it certainly wasn't 2 or 3 years ago. In fact, with the FCC task force on optimal PSAP architecture, we developed an architecture called the EC3, the Emergency Communications Cybersecurity Center, because there wasn't anything specific to Next-Gen 911 or to 911 at all. But that is predicated on not doing it 6,500 different ways. So one of the issues that we have, and this continues to be a trend in public safety, and it's our own fault, we've done it to ourselves, we need local control. A police department in one city does not operate the same as a police department in the next city, and the same we know is true for the PSAPs. But the Emergency Communications Center of tomorrow is going to be interconnected and hopefully interoperable both. You're going to be sharing information in real time the way that warfighters do with some very expensive technology right now today. It's unfortunate we're 20 years behind that curve, but it's coming. And when you look at cybersecurity, one of the toughest things I think that we deal with is if I'm an architect for a cyber solution for your emergency communications center, I can't architect yours one way, the ECC next to you another way, the ECC 3 counties over another way, and then ever expect to defend 911 as an enterprise. So when we look at defending an individual emergency communications center, we have to look, I think, at the bigger picture too, because as we move into this IP-based, interoperable, multimedia-capable world, and parts of it are already there, you're no longer an island. So the balance of local control so that you can conduct operations the way you need to, but still defending 911 as the enterprise that it is becoming, especially in an IP world, is really a tough balance. And it's something you need to consider. So training is part of it, selecting the right solution, and then, quite frankly, talking to the departments and agencies that you work with and the other ECCs that you work with on how to ensure that when you transfer information from one to another, both sides of that transaction are secure. Cybersecurity, it's data in transit, data at rest. So you've got to secure what you own in your center from ransomware and from all the other nasty things that are out there, but you also have to secure what's inbound as best you can and anything you send outbound. And that's not an easy thing to do, but it's something you need to be thinking about. And along those lines, real quickly, if you don't have, and we're finding this a problem, we have response plans for everything in public safety. You have pre-planning for fire. You have all kinds of major incident response plans. We train for mass casualty incidents or active shooters. Many, many agencies do not have a plan in place for a cyber incident. So it hits and we kind of just wing it. You can't wing it anymore. You've got to have a plan in place. It has to be vetted through the the departments and agencies you work with. You have to train to it. You have to exercise the plan, just like we do everything else in public safety, because as Mark said, when the attack hits, if you don't have a plan in place, if you don't know unplug, disconnect, secure the data, both bad data for forensic value and good data for backup recovery, if you don't have those steps in place, when the attack happens, you will be one of those agencies that pays $400,000 or $600,000 to get your data back because you didn't back up and you didn't have a plan. And by the way, here's the good news. 50% of the time you don't get your data back anyway. So something to think about is pre-planning. We do it everywhere else. We should be doing it with cyber, and we're not seeing a lot of that happening yet.
So, Jay, you were talking about if you don't secure, then the data that's being sent to another agency may be impacted. So with regards to that, are you seeing any trends today that within public safety, such as the regionalization of agencies and how that might impact public safety, their cybersecurity risks? Can you speak to that at all?
I think probably Mark and Rob can speak to it better than I can from the regionalization perspective, from the overall cyber architecture perspective, though anytime you look at combining resources and sharing data, you have a risk. And it's a threat landscape, and the threat landscape really just increases dramatically anytime you add a single machine. A lot of times in presentations, I'll ask folks if they know how many vulnerabilities get opened up by adding a laptop to a network. And folks say, oh, 5 or 6, or 60,000. Because there are, in every single laptop, there are ports designed to facilitate data flow. And every one of those ports is an ingress point for a bad actor. So add an MDT to your network in a squad car, and you have increased your threat landscape and the vulnerability ingress points tens of thousands of times. So when you add an entire county's system to that, I think you can see that it's it can be not a pretty picture. And if you're not set up to defend for it ahead of time, or if you, what we say a lot is cybersecurity has to be baked in from the onset. You have to think about it before you build your network, because if you think about it after, you have this great big wonderful data network that is completely open and vulnerable to anybody who wants to get in. And I think we have seen incident after incident at the federal, state, local, and tribal level where we thought everything was planned out and we forgot one link. The best example I can think of is the inauguration, which I was fortunate enough to work with DHS. And it was a great experience to work with the Secret Service guys. But if you ever want to watch a Secret Service agent lose all the blood in his or her face, turn off their eyes and ears 3 days before an inauguration of a president. And that happened in Washington, D.C., when all, I think it was 80% of the cameras in the district went dark 3 days before the inauguration due to ransomware. And the bad actor was not in the United States, and they got into the cameras over a wireless network. We thought of everything but. Fortunately, they were recovered in time, and it all went okay, but those kinds of things, some you just can't plan for, but you have to be ready when they hit.
For sure, and I think we see as states appropriately migrate towards next-gen 911, deploying statewide EZNets. I think one of the biggest risk areas is at a state level, we tend to be overly assumptive that as we're going to now connect all of these entities, all of those entities are appropriately prepared. All of those entities are appropriately, have appropriate cyber defense. All of those entities' infrastructure are appropriately supported from a fault and a management perspective. Because if they're not appropriately supported, that creates cyber risk as well. And I think sometimes we get a little bit out over the tips of our skis from we want to aggressively deploy next-gen 911 without really looking at, we're going to connect County A now to County B, to County C, to County D. Has anybody looked at those environments? Has anybody done an assessment to those environments? And I think some states, and I'll tout the state that we are in right now, Maryland, I think, has, to their credit, is looking at this. They executed on a statewide cyber benchmark of every PSAP in the state last year. They've legislated funding to support sort of level setting this cyber defense, and I mean, they're working through the details, but they're paying attention to this. They're choosing not to be overly assumptive. They're having discussions about, hey, we're going to connect County A to County B to County C. What does that mean before we do? To Jay's point, before we do it, let's talk about that. So I think from a trends and regionalization and deployment of statewide EZNets, I think there's significant risks, and I applaud the state of Maryland for taking a very proactive and diligent approach.
So what are some of the common misconceptions regarding cybersecurity in our market?
The biggest one that we see, and I apologize for jumping in and didn't mean to cut anybody off, but we see a lot of entities taking a very siloed or very checklist approach to cyber defense. We see RFPs for penetration test. We see RFPs that come in and assess our risk of ransomware. Cyber defense is a holistic, it is a holistic and strategic thing. It can't be just, hey, we're going to do a pen test on the PSAP network, and after we do that, we're going to check some boxes and we're good. To Jay's point earlier about having plans, vetting those plans, testing those plans. Probably the single biggest risk we see is a very narrow, very checklist-oriented approach to cyber defense. This has got to be a part of operations planning. It's got to be a part of strategic planning. It's got to be an ongoing initiative, not just with your IT professionals, but from your operations staff. This is something that we have to be aware of, conscious of, and it's got to be a part of everything we do going forward.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. What I'm seeing is that people automatically assume that and at the risk of sounding like a sales pitch, because this is what Mark and I do, they automatically assume it's going to break the bank, because nobody knows more than a government sector entity that funding is always an issue. But quite frankly, you can have antivirus, patch management, backups, endpoint detection and recovery for a few dollars per machine. I'm talking under $10 per machine for the whole network, whether it's a server, whether it's an endpoint, whether it's mobile data, whether it's a phone, whether it's a tablet. All these different things can be secured for minimal amount of money. Now, is there upfront costs with that? Yes, there is. Is there implementation costs? Of course. But ongoing, this stuff is not where it used to be 3, 4, 5 years ago. There's an interesting news solution coming out, and I can't remember if it was Mark or Jay that alluded to the solutions that are coming out for some of this ransomware, but it's called EDR, which is Endpoint Detection and Recovery. And what it does is it automatically disconnects an endpoint from the network in the event that it detects ransomware or antivirus, or a virus or whatever. If you happen, I can't remember who's putting on the webinar, but they're actually having a fight between a ransomware injection and this endpoint detection and recovery, and they're going to load that onto a machine and watch that actually work. I guess my point is that regionally we're finding out that everybody has the same misconception that this is going to eat up all the funding, and quite frankly, it just really doesn't. And so, and then from kind of, again, piggyback on what Mark said, is interoperability. You know, I don't know if it's by nature, Jay might be able to allude to it a little better, but very territorial. You know, you get into some areas where, you know, Sheriff A doesn't want to talk to Sheriff B. You know, they don't want to share that information, or there's some other reason that interoperability has certain roadblocks. And whatever those particular things are, quite frankly, we've got to get over. We have to be able to make the systems and the people talk. And until we do that, it's going to be very uphill.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. And having come from the law enforcement and emergency communications side, I can tell you, and who in here, out of curiosity, works for an agency of some sort in public safety? Excellent. How about vendor or service provider? Good. Okay. So for those of you who work for an agency, you understand that trying to get 7 fire chiefs, 9 police chiefs, a couple of city managers, and a county manager all in the room to agree to one thing is a 7-hour day. Getting them to agree to 2 things, you're buying a lot of lunches. And we've got to stop at some point when it comes to cyber especially, and realize, as Mark said, we cannot plan in a vacuum, and you cannot connect EZNets, and you cannot connect agencies to EZNets if you don't talk first. And you've got to be on the same page, because we can't do it 6,000 ways. And hopefully this won't offend any of our service provider and vendor folks in the room, but one of the biggest mistakes, I think, that is being made, and I've made it as an agency director, is when you ask about cybersecurity for a particular solution, especially in an RFP, which are a little bit light, as Mark said, on cyber right now. If the answer back from your potential vendor is, don't worry about it, I've got this, they don't got this. You need to know more, and you need to be willing to ask some tough questions.
My network's closed. I'm okay.
That's right. We're good. We're good. We don't touch the internet. Big lie number 1. Nobody who got hit by ransomware, by the way, at a public safety agency level, thought it would come in by internet. And they were right. It came in by email, and then it propagated by network connections that do, in fact, touch the outside world. That's just the way networking works. So when the vendor says, I got this, ask more questions. And in fact, there are folks, like the 2 gentlemen on either side of me, who have organizations that can help you figure out what questions to ask up front. So when you put the RFP out and you're asking for things like interoperability and multimedia and all that other good stuff, you need to be asking some specific cybersecurity questions too. Like, how do you provide for endpoint protection? What do you do to make sure that my data is protected in transit and at rest? What are your backup protocols? Do you have multiple backups? Are they off-site? And don't be afraid if some of the answers come back and say they used a cloud-based platform. Does anybody shop on Amazon? Curious. Anybody? Would you be surprised to know that Amazon's a cloud? Amazon Web Services, huge cloud architecture. Don't be afraid of that. There are states out there now mandating cloud as part of how you network. And I don't know about you guys, but if I'm going to defend an enterprise, I would much rather use some of the tools that are out there to defend the cloud architectures than to defend the traditional enterprise architecture an endpoint at a time or a premise-based server at a time. So we're not in the old days of 911 customer premise equipment. We're in a new world of interconnected and interoperable communication systems that are always connected. So make sure that your vendor understands you're concerned and hold them to the standard that you're held to. You're protecting the public, and you can't afford a gotcha. And in our world, a gotcha equates to a bad day because somebody could die, one of our responders, one of our citizens, so we can't afford to get it wrong. If your system is compromised by a cyber attack, There are going to be lots and lots of questions after the bad day. Ask the questions ahead of time. Do the best that you can to defend before the incident. You can't stop them all. And as Mark has said, law enforcement can't stop them. We're overwhelmed. Federal, state, and local level is absolutely overwhelmed. Completely reactive at this point. You have to be proactive, and it all starts with asking the right questions and working with those vendors and service providers who do have innovative ways to solve these problems. But you got to ask, and we're not doing that.
So sometimes when when you're speaking about asking questions, it brought up another one that's not been discussed before. But my question is, so you're talking about asking the right questions. Are there resources available today where if you want to make sure that here's my questions, but have I got my bases covered? Where can I go to make sure that maybe I forgot something? Is there anything out there, either through the organization or companies or something, that gives us extra resources to make sure that we're covering all our bases in those questions?
I'm going to jump in real quick with 2 shameless plugs. Go to APCO's cybersecurity website, and there are going to be some resources there for you that are constantly refreshed and updated. And go to DHS's website. The U.S. CERT, which is still underneath what is now CISA, has some really good information there on current threats and trends. So from an information gathering perspective, it won't give you all the answers. Those are 2 places that you can go to get current data, and some of it's highly technical and you can just ignore it. But those are starting points. I think Rob and Mark will probably have some better specifics on who can give you guidance on RFP language. But then there's also the FCC TFOPA report. And although there are some checklists in there, and I don't believe in a checklist-driven only approach, there are some things in that TFOPA report, especially the first report that the Cybersecurity Working Group did, that give you some guidance, that say, ask this question, look for this threat, and the checklist is just a readiness checklist. It's not, this is how you secure your entire PSAP. It's, here are some things you just need to look for. The one thing I will say, when you do stuff like that, be honest with yourselves. Don't fake the answer so you look good to your boss's boss. Be honest, because it's your opportunity to identify a threat and fix it before it becomes a problem.
I think I would first reinforce Jay's topic on the TFOPA report. I believe that's the December 2016.
Yes, sir.
And specifically within that report, it's section 4.4, addresses cybersecurity. The TFOPA report is really a framework for next-gen 911 readiness, but the cybersecurity subsection is section 4.4. It's a superb guidance on what to do. I feel like PSAP leadership, individuals like us sit here and tell you how horrible this is, and the burden's on you, but I found that report, and one of the reasons we like that report is it was by public safety for public safety. It is public safety specific. So we reference a lot of the other standards. We're a big ITIL shop. We like NIST 800, but that TFOPA report is forged by public safety professionals for public safety. So they understand your world, they understand your constraints, and they understand your priorities. The other, and this is consistent with that guidance within that section 4.4, is we encourage every entity to have an independent, to the concept of being honest with yourself, have an independent third-party cybersecurity assessment conducted on your environment. Make sure the approach is holistic, not just a pen test on the PSAP network, because there are areas of your county network or your city network that are connected to your network that supports the transport of your CAD application. So make sure that this assessment is appropriate in scope, appropriate in approach, and we see tremendous value in having it be conducted by an independent third party. When Merrill Lynch has their financial results audited, They don't do it themselves and publish it. They have an independent auditor come in and audit their financial results. There are firms in this space, and again, I want to reinforce the integrity of my recommendation. My firm is in this business. We'd love to help you, but if not us, make sure that someone conducts that independent third-party assessment on your environment. That is the key starting point. It will give you valuable data on your level of risk, the specific areas of risk, and that in itself, I think, will provide you excellent guidance on what do we do, what are the priorities, and how do we remediate and improve our defense going forward.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. You know, I've always said, as I travel to these different states and speak at different APCO and NINA conferences, I always end with saying, if you don't call us, call somebody. You know, this is way too important for trying to get a sale. This is, like Jay said, lives on the line when it comes to this network being down. But getting back to the original question, NTCA has a very good cybersecurity bundle that includes an overall cybersecurity plan, questions to ask, who to ask them of, and it's a very good bundle. I think it's $150, but it is all inclusive. It has everything you could think of, from physical security to hardening your routers to patch management, all those different things. So I would encourage you to look at that. Of course, DHS has been a great resource. ComISAC, you're able to get alerts based on the threats that are occurring almost in real time. I mean, we get these alerts from ComISAC and Department of Homeland Security, I would say within 5 minutes of that information being disseminated to the department. You can also look through the NIST 800-53 standard, which is a very easy read. I don't know if it's because I'm a nerd or I like reading that type of stuff, but for me it's an easy read because it basically lists all of the controls out based on certain categories. So if you have access control, it's, are there locks on doors to critical infrastructure? Are there locks on doors to human resource data? And then you go to networking, hardware, personnel, and it just lists them all out for you. Now, the great thing about the NIST standard is it's very malleable. It's not, you're never NIST compliant, but you are following the NIST framework. There are controls in there that you won't necessarily use. Out of the 253 that are available at our company, we use 181. So we've cut out, 70-something controls because they don't apply to our company. But looking through that guideline and framework will give you very good guidance on what to ask of your vendor, or what guidance to give your IT professional to really secure your network, and not just the network, but the buildings themselves in which the networks reside. It's very easy for somebody to walk in somewhere, go down into a subterranean data center and start messing around with stuff if you don't have access controls in place. So I would say the NTCA Cybersecurity Bundle, Department of Homeland Security, ComISAC, and the NIST standard.
Thank you.
And I'll throw in real quick, as far as the ComISAC is concerned, it's under the NCC, the National Coordinating Center for Communications, which is under the new CISA organization. That's actually where I used to work. If you're a member of APCO, you're a member of the ComISAC. APCO represents public safety along with NINA and a few others on the ComISAC. They're weekly briefings, and as Rob said, they are a real-world 24/7, 365 cyber monitoring and action center. So not only are they seeing the information in real time and disseminating it in near real time, but you have a direct pipe through the NCC to the ComISAC for public safety as a member of APCO. And it's ncc@hq.dhs.gov for the 24/7 watch. And if you email them with an issue, they will respond with a phone number on a non-secure line that you can call, and you will talk to a watch officer. So you actually have a pipe direct to DHS for public safety by virtue of the fact that you're a member of APCO and a working public safety professional. And we think that's a pretty big benefit in this particular day and age, to be able to reach out to a federal level resource with 24/7, 365 monitoring capability. Please don't be afraid to use it. And if you're unsure of how to get a hold of them, my email, unfortunately, is very public on the APCO website, along with our Director of Comm Center 911 and our Technical Services Manager, all of whom are plugged in directly to DHS. If you need them, they're there, so call us or email us, and we'll make sure you get put in touch. And that's another thing the APCO website tries to do. As we get these bulletins, we try to make sure that they're put out on that cyber website so that you have them as well. And every now and then you will see an email from us, usually has a header like "this link is vetted and secure," because we're getting news from DHS of a potential critical incident. Please
Thank
read
you.
those.
Thank you. That's great information, and I know that we've heard a lot. But what are some of your questions? If we could open it up to you, if we can get a mic over there, and we will.
So what are the vendors doing as far as like Microsoft or Cisco or FortiGate to stop this crypto stuff? I mean, you know, for every attack, there's always a defense. And since we've been attacked for quite a while now, there should be some defense coming from the vendors. And you guys see any of that kind of thing happening?
Well, I can tell you from a Microsoft standpoint, those guys got their hands full too. You know, they're overburdened. Their operating system obviously takes over the majority of networks in the world. And so the patch management, from just strictly a patch management standpoint, you can't compromise a machine without a vulnerability, and they're constantly trying to keep up as well. What we're starting to see is some talk between these different, you know, we call them big boys, you know, about coordinated efforts to make sure that these are taken care of in a swift manner, because they're understanding that if they don't, like the public safety isn't, that the repercussions of that are dramatic. Now, is that motivated by a hit on the bottom line? I don't know. Do I care? Not really. As long as it gets fixed, that's really what we're after from a consumer standpoint. But they're getting hammered just as much as the public sector.
Yeah, I wish I had a better story to tell here, but having spent 31 years at a very large corporation, I have an intimate understanding of the incentives and the motivations, which are driven by economics. Cisco, Microsoft, FortiGate are going to be continually assessing how much R&D, how much resources do I spend in anticipating, being out in front of attack vectors, innovation for actors, et cetera. And so against that investment, what is my return going to be? The unfortunate reality is we're public safety professionals. We're a percentage of their marketplace. We're not the majority of their marketplace. We're not the majority area where they make their money. So the priority in the enterprise space is, and maybe I'm being overly negative here, but I just don't think the priority in the enterprise space is ever going to be similar to the priority in the public safety space. And because of that, I think there's always going to be a bit of disappointment in their level of investment and their level of innovation in being out in front of the problem.
And I'm going to throw out one more. I know Mark said we're the doom and gloom and it's all on you. Don't want to get too far down that road again, but from this perspective, I think it's important. The vendors are overwhelmed. There's no doubt about it. If you look at Microsoft or any of these cloud-based providers, I mean, AWS is under continuous attack from DDoS perpetrators every day. And they throw tons and tons of money at it because it's in their best interest financially. but the vendors can only do so much. Show of hands, who in here has Windows 7 machines on your network right now? Who knows when Windows 7 end of lives? When is it? January of 2020. Wait a minute. January. Uh-oh. Anybody have plans to replace all your Windows 7 machines? So 30 hands go up, we have them. 3 hands go up, we're going to replace them. What happens to the other 25, 27 folks in here? You're going to have a machine that's no longer patched, no longer has the latest patches for the operating system. And that's only one aspect. Who still uses Internet Explorer? It's okay. It's still out there. Do you have the latest patch version of Internet Explorer on the latest patched version of the Windows 7 machine?
That's right. Yeah.
So if we don't do our part, there's only so much industry can do for us. Cisco's another really good example. They have great products, and they touch virtually every network out there. But Cisco patches their stuff continuously, and they send the patches out. And if you don't apply the patches, you do have vulnerabilities. So we have to hold up our end of it, too, because those patches come out all the time, and you need to make sure you have the latest and greatest, because there's only so much they can do.
We have a couple of minutes left. Is there any other questions that are burning that you would like to ask us, sir? Let's get the mic.
So earlier you guys talked about RFPs, and one of the things I see in the RFP requests or procurement requests is, are you compliant with NIST 800-53 or ISO? And the question that always comes up is, how do you answer that? Because is it a 40-page document answering every control, or do you say yes, we're capable, right? What do you see a change in trend? Because a lot of times it takes a lot of time for the RFP evaluators to go through that, right? And I don't see that being staffed a lot of times.
Right, and that's a great question. So you're never really compliant with NIST. It's, like I said before, it's a very malleable standard. When we write about, just from our business standpoint, when we write about what we do with NIST, we simply say that we've adopted and follow the NIST 800-53 framework. NIST was developed with human nature in mind, because human nature is you follow the path of least resistance. And with ISO, PCI, some of these other standards, the amount of work that goes into a standard that doesn't necessarily hit every niche of your company is monumental. And the National Institute of Standards and Technology understood that when they built the framework. So the individuals that are receiving your responses will understand that. Now, if they reply back to you and they're saying something of, if they use the word compliance, if they use the word that in accordance with
Certification.
When talking about the NIST standard, that should perk your ears. That partner obviously is not squared away enough to understand that NIST is never complete. Your journey, if you will, and your maturing of your cybersecurity plan is never done. And NIST is the exact standard that's used for that, because it joins up well with what cybersecurity is, and that's a constantly evolving effort. So I hope that answered your question, but yeah, if you hear those 3 or 4 buzzwords as it pertains to NIST, get a second opinion.
Okay, we have one quick question we have time for. Okay.
Thank you. We've seen local 911 vendors with very little interest in securing the analog and physical endpoints of our networks. How do we expect these same vendors to support a next-gen 911 without some federal incentive or legislative work that's done? Because if there's no money in it for the vendors, they're not going to do it. Even if we have it on the RFP, we're not seeing them with any interest unless it's financially incentive for them.
That is an excellent question.
It is an excellent question, and I think, again, I think large corporations are driven by economics. They're going to invest where they see a return in that investment. My personal opinion is I agree with your statement. I agree that this should be an area of concern and that vendors are not. I think vendors, large, dominant vendors, are often somewhat overly assumptive. You know, I'm so-and-so, trust me, we're good. I think, and again, you know, we're in the panel of doom and gloom. I think that there are independent third-party solutions that can provide oversight for those vendors and make recommendations. I think the RFP process, you referenced it as well, needs to be how you construct that RFP needs to be key. How you architect the solution, how you architect the infrastructure. There's so many components, it can't be oversimplified. And one of the trends we see from a large vendor perspective is, you know, the CPE vendor only cares about the CPE environment, and they're going to come in and, hey, this is how we're going to architect this network. We don't care. Oh, do you use a CAD application? Because we don't care about that. What we care about is the CPE. I think that as an entity, you need to look at your environment holistically. You need to look at cyber defense holistically. There are emerging tools, firms that can provide, you know, better oversight, more holistic oversight, vendor-neutral oversight, and those firms and solutions are emerging because the large vendors are not paying enough attention to it. Do I hope that changes? Absolutely, but I think it's going to be slow.
Thank you. Well, we are out of time, and I would like to say that I don't view you guys as a doom and gloom panel. I view you as hope, because you have given us a lot of information to take back, to think about, to implement, and I'm really excited. So thank you very much. I'm going to throw their contact information up on the screen so that you can ask further questions.
I'll be available for a while after the session as well. So.
Yes, so thank you very much for your attendance, and thank you, gentlemen, for your information and willingness to participate here. Thank you so much.